Unfortunately, throughout this week, President Joe Biden has been steadily seeming to backtrack, both in public at his town hall this week and in private in conversations about their path and the timeline for canceling student loan debt. He's been vocally in support of $10,000 of cancellation, although politicians from progressives like AOC to Chuck Schumer himself have been saying he should cancel $50,000, that he should do it immediately through an executive order. He doesn't seem willing to do any of those things. He doesn't think that he has the legal authority to cancel $50,000, but he also announced this week that the $10,000 wouldn't be done via executive order. So I don't even know what the legal authority thing has to do with anything, since they'd be doing it through legislation that would also just be filibustered. So there's a lot of issues there. But what do people actually think? Well, Data for Progress did a poll and found very broad support for cancellation. They found 54% of likely voters think Biden should use his executive authority to cancel $50,000 in student debt, compared to just 37% who said he should not forgive that debt. But very importantly, since the numbers that are generally thrown around are 10,000 or 50,000, you should also know that according to this study, using a randomized test where voters were either asked about 10,000 or 50,000, Data for Progress did not find any evidence that 50,000 of cancellation would be less popular. It's not a thing where people just happen to be okay with a little bit of cancellation, but once the number goes up, they're suddenly against it. That is not what they found. And we have additional numbers on who has debt, how much they have, but initially it is a popular position, and also coincidentally one that he has promised he would do. Thoughts?
Yeah, Kenya, one of the excuses they use is, well, look, this is gonna help rich people too much. Yeah, that's the main problem with the proposal. Anyway, before I get into my opinions, what's your take on that excuse?
I think this is a part of a number of concerning dial backs that even in some of the conversations I had with folks back in Milwaukee, where President Joe Biden had his town hall earlier this week, a number of Black voters who are essential in landing Biden the victory for winning back the White House. It was a concern, not only what we're hearing are the discrepancies about whether voters can expect to receive another $2,000 or $1,400, or whether there actually will be an increase in the federal minimum wage. These are issues that the Biden administration has listed as core to their priorities, which are addressing racial inequities within the institutions of the government. And if you're acknowledging what what we're even seeing Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren and others acknowledge are core elements of those racial inequities that are being made worse by a coronavirus pandemic that's disproportionately impacting these communities, what you're going to see is that these type of policies are largely in support or largely supported by Black communities, Black voters. Because if we're looking specifically even at student loans, it's Black women who have a disproportionate amount of student loan debt who stand to benefit from this type of executive order or legislation, especially if we're talking about upwards of $50,000. But when you have a president who is as immediately as we're talking about the power of change, the unprecedented moment and how it was an urgency or righteous anger, as I spoke with some others who spoke of the moment of the time, just as quickly as you're seeing what can't be done, what might not be feasible, what will require unity, which on account of unity might therefore require a lack of accountability. When you're hearing these messages from a president who acknowledged that he needed this voting bloc's vote, that he needed the support of Black Americans, this becomes problematic when you're hearing the very policies that could impact you immediately be the ones that are subject to being ripped off the table.
Yeah. And Cenk, you were talking about the argument that this would just be for rich people, or sometimes it's formulated as we just don't want to cancel the debt for people who went to Harvard, like as if only rich people go to Harvard. Like if you're lucky enough to get to go to Harvard, well, screw you. You should have chosen a less prestigious school, I guess. Well, apparently, passage of the $50,000 debt cancellation proposal would mean, quote, nearly 85% of young borrowers in the poorest communities would become free of student debt. This crisis is the culmination of waning government funding for higher education, wage stagnation, wealth inequality, and a misleading emphasis on obtaining high credentials, all leading to the financial gap between college prices and later earnings. That is according to this report, Student Debt in Young America. And they found that the number of borrowers is going up, the number of loans each borrower takes out is going up, the amount of each one of those loans is going up. And so you can see that in 2019, 18 to 35-year-olds with student loan debt owed nearly $35,000 on average, compared to just $28,000 a decade earlier. And in 2009, there were 32 million federal borrowers. A decade later, that had jumped up to 43 million. And they have other numbers having to do with the racial inequity in student loan debt, both average and mean as well. But the arguments that Biden has been making or his team have been making just don't make sense. The legal argument, the political path forward, even the justification for another round of hyper targeting of benefits that always seems to just delay and sometimes cancel the policy being proposed fully anyway. So the numbers just don't bear out what he's been saying, as thankfully some politicians like AOC have been pointing out throughout the week.
Yeah, so there's two different issues here. One is how are you going to substantively handle this? And I actually think that's complicated. So one of the things I would look at if I was doing this policy is, and of course thoughtful legislators have looked at this, is all right, public schools versus private schools. Because if we are going to do free college for public schools, which I think we should do, and I think it's really important, college for all, well, then it makes a lot of sense to make sure that you cancel the debt of the people who went to public schools earlier. And that's an issue of fairness and equity, et cetera, right? Yes, the amount of money that you forgive is potentially an issue. And there are other issues to grapple with. How about the folks who paid off their debt before? So we can work through these issues, but we all have to at least agree on facts. We're supposed to be past the Trump world. So if you hear a so-called centrist Democrat, who I would call a corporate Democrat, and yes, that includes Joe Biden, tell you that doing $50,000 is less popular, it's just not true. We just gave you the facts. There's no question that it's not true. Okay, so that's point number one. Point two, if you say, well, it becomes politically problematic if you relieve that much debt. We could do 10,000, but not 50,000. Well, again, the numbers don't bear that out. The 50,000 is actually more popular. But second of all, politically speaking, 10,000 is good. People will feel that. That's a giant amount of money. But 50,000 liberates millions of Americans. Liberates them. They don't have any debt. Most of them will not have any student debt anymore because the average student debt's 35,000. And then they are free to take any job they want. And just the psychological relief of that, let alone the economic impact of the extra spending power they have, will be awesome. So if they say, hey, that's not doable because of those reasons, that is also definitively not true. Politically, it would definitely help. So then if you're wondering, well, look, I'm a good Democrat and I kind of like Biden and Pelosi and stuff. So why are they doing this though? There must be a legitimate reason. Well, partly they've bought into this mythology of when Republicans get in, they spend like drunk sailors and give trillions of dollars of tax cuts to the rich. And when Democrats come in, they have to clean up the mess and be fiscally responsible and never add to the deficit, et cetera. I think Biden has internalized that. The other reason, keeping it real, is giant donors. And you say, wait a minute, what's the donor angle here? It's mainly the government that has this loan, right? The angle is, if you do $1.6 trillion in student debt relief, you won't have money left over to do $1.6 trillion in tax cuts. So that's why Trump did $1.9 trillion of tax cuts and zero relief, whether it was student debt or healthcare or any of those issues. So if you think that politicians that are Democratic don't take millions of dollars in campaign donations in their account, well, you're just not correct. They're not angels, they're human beings. And like Professor Larry Lessig says, ironically at Harvard, they lean to the green. So that's what's happening here. Because the other arguments for not doing bigger relief don't hold water. And one last one here. Usually they hide behind, I gotta tell Senate tradition and technical rules about reconciliation, and I got a parliamentarian and all this nonsense. And golly gee, Manchin and Sinema won't say yes. This one you can do through executive order. So honestly, Biden has nowhere to hide on this one.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.